Hey Baruch, how are you doing tonight?
Thank God I'm doing well, Yerme. How about yourself?
Doing incredible, incredible. This is incredible that we are on our sixth episode, the Exceptionally Irresistible Show. This is super exciting.
It is indeed, and this was a very interesting one. I kind of went all out on this one, full authenticity, full transparency, which is something I'm very big on. And hopefully the point of that is that people should be able to learn and relate and grow from that as well. But I'm really excited about our guest tonight, a very special person
Absolutely.
with some incredible experience. We're ready to
Yeah,
bring him in.
I'm bringing him in. There he is, Dr. Gary Fisher.
Hi, guys.
How are you
Hey,
doing
thank
today?
you
Tonight?
so much.
I'm well, thanks. And you?
Awesome, doing well.
Doing great.
So we're going to start off with a little bit of a bio as to who you are, and then we're going to ask you to kind of reintroduce yourself in your own words, if that's all right.
Okay.
So I have my official script here. So we are introducing Dr. Gary Fisher. Dr. Fisher has worked in the treatment of addictive disorders for the past 40 plus years as a counselor, administrator, and therapist, both in private practice and in conjunction with treatment programs in Texas, Hawaii, Australia, and California. I've been to 3 of those 4 places, so that's pretty cool. His wide range of experiences includes work with adolescents, adults, dual diagnosed clients, couples, and families in culturally diverse populations. Dr. Fisher has gone through rigorous training in the use of EMDR for both addictive and trauma related issues and is certified with the EMDR International Association. As a provider of EMDR based therapy, Dr. Fisher aids his clients in learning to harness and channel their powerful creative energies in a productive and healthy manner. That is incredible. There's so much there that I'm going to have to start taking notes on being able to come back to, because there's some things that popped out to me on the second reading that I didn't catch the first. But let's get started with, if you don't mind, kind of introducing yourself as to who you are, and where you got to, how you are, where you are today and how you got there, what you're all about, essentially.
Okay. Gary Fisher. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology and a master's in social psychology from the University of Hawaii. And I've always been interested in psychology. I was always a people watcher, and friends would come and talk to me, and I would give advice. And I always liked helping people as well. When 42 years ago, 43 years ago almost, I was in nursing school to become a registered nurse. Wow. And my wife at the time and I were having difficulties with, alcohol and drugs and stuff. And we went from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Beaumont, Texas to get some help. And we wound up moving to Beaumont and staying there. And then I moved to Houston, Dallas, back to Beaumont to work, and then back to Dallas to work, and then all over the place. So I went back to school. I didn't have any degrees when I was 40 years old. I went back to college to finish my bachelor's degree, went on for my master's and my doctorate after that, and worked. Prior to those degrees, I worked as a counselor and administrator in those places you mentioned, with substance abuse programs and all sorts of addictive disorders, eating disorders, gambling. Sex addicts were not quite as prominent as they are now. And it's been a great adventure. I got to work in Australia a little bit and came to Los Angeles to get my doctorate and stayed here. And here's where I am. And I have a private practice on the west side of LA, which I've been in for over 40 years now.
Wow.
So,
This is incredible. Brilliant. That's incredible. Just a quick note. I forgot to mention this in the beginning of the show. Generally speaking, we get a lot of comments from our audience members. Unfortunately, they're not going to be highlighted in this particular show, and due to transparency, Dr. Fisher is one incredible person that is a little bit hard to pin down to get him for his wisdom. So we had to pre-record this show. However, Bark and I will be live, and we will be sharing on the comments. So we will still be interacting with all the audiences currently watching. But this is a pre-recorded show, so please excuse us if we are not highlighting you in this particular show. But please, still interact, still comment, because we will be there live and we will interact with you. So again, Gary, thank you so much for, showing up and even, accepting to this recording. I share
my
with
pleasure.
you.
And I just want to say I am sorry that I couldn't really do the live show because I would have loved to have been able to interact also. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I very much relate to you. And it's funny that I have a similar story getting into psychology. And I remember sitting in the class and just looking around and just randomly asking people, what are you doing here? Like, what drew you to psychology? And the average answer was my background, just my background. I had a hardship, I had a trauma, I had whatever it was, and I really just want to help people. And I was there. The funny story with me is that I was taken to the rooms by my ears, literally. Um, my mentor, my support system, took me to the rooms with my ears, and I was like, "Why are you taking me to AA? I never drank in my life. I'm a good boy, never did drugs, never did these kind of things." But I was addicted to anger. I had an anger issue, and they told me, this room is really going to help you, which it really did. I ended up working in the rooms. That's how I got to the prison system, working with addicts who ended up in the prison system. And, one thing led to another to the psychology as well. So it's just very relatable. And thank you for sharing, your history, your background. It's really incredible.
Thank you.
The funny thing is that, so one of the things that I noticed from what you were sharing, Gary, I was able to do it. In the pre-show, I was telling Dr. Fisher how difficult it is for me to address people by their names if they have a title. So now everybody knows what that was about. But it was interesting because you're sharing that, if I'm understanding correctly, you went into specifically addiction psychology, if I'm saying that correctly, because that was something that you were working on yourself. Did I understand that correctly? Or was this that was something that you were passionate about helping people with?
Well, no, I did have some issues with, alcohol and prescription drugs.
Okay.
So,
because that was something that I know from an alternative source about you, is that if I'm remembering correctly, your approach to challenges or to fears is to really kind of face them head on. And like, let's say I'm afraid of heights, well, I'm going to go to the highest place I can think of and challenge that fear. If I'm afraid of, I don't know, speaking to people or whatever it may be, then I'm going to go and face that head on. Can you speak a little more towards that and how that came about being part of you and who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, basically, I was a coward, and I knew it, and I hated myself for my cowardice, but I could not overcome it in a lot of cases. Now, I also was, I guess you could say, courageous in other ways, but in certain ways I just was a coward. And New Year's Eve, 1979 to 1980, I had what's referred to as a very profound spiritual or psychic change, spiritual experience or psychic change. And I experienced a connection to God that I choose to call it God, because I spent a year once trying to think of a different name, and I couldn't think of anything else to call it other than the universe with a capital U. But so I connected to God, and through that connection, was able to tap into a source of courage and strength that prior to that I had not been able to tap into. And I began to do a lot of reading and a lot of experiencing with whatever I was afraid of. I was going to walk right into it. Now
Wow.
we're not talking about realistic fear and things that are self-preserving. We're talking about, I was afraid of unenclosed heights. So I would go to the top of the stratosphere in Las Vegas and ride their needle ride, which if you've ever ridden, it goes straight up in the air and then you come down in the G forces. But the thing about it is you're looking out into about 20 miles of wide open spaces, and there's nothing, just the straps holding you in. So I did that. I was afraid of being in water over my head. So when I tried to get my PADI certificate to be a scuba diver, I couldn't do the swim originally because I would panic anytime I got into the deeper water. So they showed me how to do it with the backstroke and walked me through it. And then I went and I got my PADI certificate and I was able to scuba dive. But unfortunately, I went through my air a lot quicker than everybody else because of the way I was breathing. I was afraid of riding a motorcycle, and so I bought motorcycles and rode them. I did have an accident on one, but I ride a motorcycle today, and I'm 70 years old. So But I ride an old man's motorcycle. It's a 3-wheeler. It's a gigantic Harley Davidson. Just to put a plug in there. But and if there was a woman that I saw that I thought was attractive, I would go up to them and just, even if it wasn't anything other than you are incredibly beautiful and I just wanted to tell you, and then I would walk away. I just started to be in the habit of whatever I was afraid of, I was going to face, because it wasn't that I wasn't afraid. I was really afraid, but courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the right action in spite of being afraid.
Wow.
And so I developed courage, and it came in handy quite a few times, actually. There were many moments where I was faced with potentially physical violence with people. And one time in particular, there was a man who was coming around and he was very upset. His wife was involved with a group of people that we were hanging out with, and he had already accosted somebody. And we were sitting in a Denny's in Beaumont, Texas, talking about, and I just, bragged about what I would say to him if I saw him and how I would handle the situation. And lo and behold, God has a real sense of humor. And as I was walking out of the restaurant, there he was, right in front of me. And he was a very tall, muscular, truly a redneck. His neck was exceptionally red. And he was standing in front of me, clenching his fists. And I felt like one of those cartoons where you see the heart kind of bouncing out of the chest. And I looked him in the eye and never took my eyes off of his eyes. He asked me some questions. I gave him the answers that I said I would give him in the restaurant. And I knew at any moment he could, literally beat the crap out of me. And he just turned around and walked away. And I had that happen numerous times, people just wanting to do violence. And like I said, it wasn't that I wasn't afraid. I was afraid, but I wouldn't let the fear dictate what I did. And out of that, out of those experiences, and a growing experience of also doing something that goes along with that, is I also learned around that time, and when I went back to school at 40, this other stuff was around 27, 28, my late 20s, and other experiences, living in places around the world. But I took that experience and turned it into that whatever was uncomfortable, whatever I didn't like, I did that first.
Mm.
Wow.
Because realistically, that's how you spend the least amount of time with things you don't like or are uncomfortable, is you do them right away and they're done and over with.
Wow.
Procrastination means you spend the most time with the uncomfortable, dislikable stuff.
Mm.
And so when I went back to school, I just did everything really, really right away. I turned in my dissertation like 8 months before I graduated,
Wow.
and cruised my last semester, which was really nice.
Wow.
Nice.
And it was just that, and that has served me really well. So that's how I come by that kind of stuff.
That's incredible.
It's really
Lots
amazing.
of golden nuggets in there, Jeremy.
No, absolutely. I think Gary kind of like set up now the whole show in the sense of like, you know, I had a bunch of questions about, you know, about Gary's thoughts about, you know, we have our topic, which is the finding meaning and purpose within hardships, and you know, Gary sharing his personal story about the different hardships that he had to go through, that he had to endure. I very much relate on many fears that I personally had as well, that I just chose to face them, to just train myself to, you know, to just overcome, to have that. I believe fear is the biggest thief of any dream, anything that we want. Fear is the cause. I know the needle you're talking about in Las Vegas, and I'm still afraid of getting onto that, but it's on my bucket list to get there. I will be honest.
Okay, but I will not skydive. That's one fear I'm not going to face. I'm fine with that. I'm 70 years old. I don't have to face that one.
I'm
But
still doing skydiving. It's on my list, so I'm challenging you to that one.
They refer to fear as the soul killer, and I think it's really true.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
Wow.
And you know, that's why I do want to jump just one quick thing to this question. You know, finding meaning and purpose in every situation. So I can only talk for myself, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. And you know, Baruch, also to jump in on this. The way I see something that I'm afraid of. I say, okay, this is just a temporary situation. This is only a temporary circumstance. What if I am to overcome this right here, right now? There has to be some kind of meaning and purpose. There has to be a reason why I would do it. That's how I face my fear. Well, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I just want to talk about a couple different things, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There's two books that, and I know we referenced this before we got on air. One of them being Viktor Frankl's work, you know, and for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the book, but Man's Search for Meaning. Yes. Mm-hmm. And the other one was Where is God When It Hurts? And that's a book by Philip Yancey. And I read that many, many years ago. And he talks about in that book, which is Christian based. He's Christian based. But he talks about this idea of where is God when it hurts. And he talks about Hansen's disease, which is leprosy, and how one of the things in leprosy is that the pain network in the body doesn't work. People who have leprosy, and I don't know if it's all cases, but they don't know that something's hurting them. They've lost the ability to feel pain. And which is why you'll see many times they'll do things that are self-injurious because they don't know that they're injuring themselves. They would buy a pair of shoes that look great but are too tight, and they won't know they're too tight. The blood flow will get cut off, and eventually it could become gangrenous and have to be amputated. And what he talks about is that there was a group of people who tried to duplicate or replicate the human pain network, and they just couldn't do it. They spent millions of dollars trying to do it, and they just couldn't do it. And the premise really is that pain is not something to be avoided at all cost. Pain is something to be paid attention to. And of course, Frankl's book about man's search for meaning, I read that, decades ago as well. And out of that, I developed a workshop I've done on the 12 steps, because I work a lot with people who are in 12-step programs. And we talk about the 4 bodies. There's the physical body, and what are the physical needs, air, water, food, and shelter in harsh climates, that type of thing. There's the intellectual body that needs stimulation and knowledge. Otherwise, it's one of the things that they say staves off dementia and Alzheimer's, is making use of our brain if we learn new skills and practice skills, which is why they recommend older people to do crossword puzzles and those types of things to keep yourself stimulated. There's the emotional body, where we need emotional safety, we need intimacy, emotional intimacy, we need community, we need validation and affirmation and all sorts of other things to grow emotionally. And then there's the spiritual body, which needs meaning and purpose and transcendence. And that came directly out of my experience reading Frankl's book. That without meaning and purpose, it's very difficult to go through anything. And Nietzsche said something which I'm going to butcher because I'm not very good at quotes, but something about if you know the why, you can go through any how, or something like that. That if I, and we assign our own meaning, there is no, the existential crisis, basically, and the existential pain is to find meaning in a seemingly meaningless existence. We decide that for ourselves. Nobody else decides that. Nobody else can actually really give us that, because unless we're willing to grab onto it, it won't have meaning for us. But I added transcendence to that, because I think we need to transcend our individual selves. We need to connect and belong with something greater than us, whether that's a family, a religion, a community, a planet, whatever it is. To become part of something much larger also lends meaning and purpose to what we do. So I talk with my clients all the time about that and about finding that for themselves. Because I get asked the question a lot is, why bother? What's the point? Those two questions. Why bother and what's the point? And I just say, well, you have to decide what the point is. You have to figure out why you're going to bother doing all this stuff, why you're going to bother going through all of this pain. If there was no meaning to it, if you don't mind, I'll just riff off on one other story, if you don't mind.
No, please. Yeah.
You said tangents are great.
I'm like,
better you should go on a tangent than me and I.
Okay. So I was living in Hawaii, which I got to do for about 13 years, and it was just marvelous. But I was working out on the leeward shore at a psychiatric hospital, and I would come out of the hospital, and this gorgeous panoramic view of the ocean and the mountains, and it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I would be driving in that, and my, what I call my head, which is not my brain or my mind, it's that separated ego state that I used to live in a lot, would say, yeah, but you're going to die and you'll never see it again. And and so one night I was living on the windward side, and I was having an existential time, and I went down to a very secluded beach on the windward side, and I was sitting on the beach, and I was talking to myself and to the universe, and I tried to I tried to have a belief. I played with the idea of a belief that none of this had any meaning at all, that nothing I did really made any difference, that my life was finite, and it really wasn't going to matter what I did in the scheme of things. And I tried to internalize that everything was random, and that whole idea, a kind of nihilistic view of things. And I tried to internalize that. And as I tried to take that in me, I could find no reason to go on living. And if I did go on living, I would just be grabbing for whatever, pleasure I could find or immediate gratification I could grab. And so I set that aside for a moment. And then I played with the idea of that everything does have meaning, that what I do makes a difference. And I actually feel emotional even talking about it. And that even on an infinitesimally tiny level, the good that I bring into the world makes a difference to the universe. It's not measurable; it's so small,
Right.
but it makes a difference, and it makes a bigger difference. The smaller I get, the smaller the space gets. So in my immediate circle, it has more meaning, but on the universal level, it has immeasurable, not enough.
Right.
Wow.
And I took that in, and I played with that, and I thought, well, you know what? I can live in a world where that's true. And I decided that I was going to believe in God, and I was going to believe in my life having meaning, and that what I do makes a difference. And if I'm wrong, I will at least have had a good life. If I took in the other belief system and I was wrong, I'd probably kill myself, and then I'd find out that I was wrong, and I'd be really upset.
Wow.
So this way, it just seemed logical that living a life that had some meaning and purpose to it was worthwhile, just on this lifetime level. And I don't know if there's anything afterwards. I grew up, my grandmother said there was nothing, and that once we died, we were dead, and that scared the heck out of me as a child.
Sure.
And it still does, but I've learned to live with that. And I also decided that, okay, I'm going to go off on one more tangent. I was given a car. In my first marriage, I was given a car as a wedding present by my in-laws. And within a couple of weeks, it was trashed. It was just,
wow.
And years later, I bought a car with some money my grandmother had saved for me, and I earned myself. And an accident happened where somebody threw a cigarette out the window, came back in, landed in the backseat, burned a big hole in the backseat.
Whoa.
And I put the car in a garage. I couldn't even look at it. I was so heartbroken about it. I finally went to a junkyard, found a seat that was an exact match, fixed it, wound up driving it, sold it for more than I paid for it.
Wow.
And I use that as an example of that first car, things that came into my sphere of influence back before I had this spiritual experience that I talked about earlier, were worse off for having come within my sphere of influence. And now later, years later, I saw the car as a kind of a analogy that things that came into my life now, things and people, were better having been in my sphere of influence. And I wanted that to be the legacy of my life.
Wow.
Wow.
I read a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Have you guys read that book?
Dale Carnegie, yeah.
No.
It's not
Covey.
Covey,
Yeah,
sorry.
Stephen
That's
Covey.
right. Covey, yeah.
Dale Carnegie wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People.
That's right. I always mix up the two. Yeah.
But in the 7 Habits, one of the first exercises he does is to write a mission statement, for a personal mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a personal mission statement about 40 years ago.
Wow.
And I've lived my life based on that personal mission statement.
Wow.
And that mission statement has also lent meaning and purpose to my life, and has made, I've been married 4 times. I've been divorced 3. I've been bankrupt. I've been broke. I was living in Hawaii. I had a nickel and a penny in my pocket and no prospects. And it's been a great adventure. And I wouldn't change any of it, because it's all made me who I am today, and I'm okay with that. So
Right.
So anyway, that's a long answer to a short question, and I apologize for my
this was incredible.
There's so much value there, and I say this every show now, and I'm sure everybody's getting sick and tired of hearing it, but I'm very fortunate that I get to watch the recap to put together the pieces to give it to Jeremy, and I have to stop saying it every single show, but I say it every show because there's always things that come to surface later. I've got my notes here. A couple things I wanted to kind of highlight. Something you said that is very powerful, that I think oftentimes when you're part of a community or a part of a religion or like you specifically said, find that, if I'm remembering correctly, like find those people. But I think one of the challenges a lot of people have is when they're part of a community or part of a religion, there's this group meaning that is kind of placed on them. And it's very hard to follow through. Like one of the things, how I differentiated myself from my father a lot was my father chose to be religious. He was not religious, and he chose to be religious. I was born into religiosity. So something that he chose was now something that was kind of being forced upon me. And it wasn't until I was able to find the meaning in it that I was able to fully accept it. And one of the things that happened was my meaning and being Orthodox Jewish was different than his meaning. He found something in it that he liked, which is what drew him towards it. And even though I was born into it, I had to find that meaning on my own. And it was different than his. But that is something I think a lot of people, when they're looking for meaning, they're looking for this, they're looking for group meaning, or they're forced to think in a way of what is the meaning of the group as a whole, whether it's a family, whether it's a culture, whether it's religion, or whatever it may be. And I think it's extremely important, and I'm really glad you said it, that we have to highlight the fact that no, it's about individual meaning. What brings me meaning and purpose? Because Friday night we have the Friday night dinner. For one person, the meaning could be the family together. For somebody else, it could be the rituals that we do. Another thing that I wanted to highlight was that you said something really interesting, that our meaning or our purpose and the global aspect or in the universal aspect might be very, very small, but to the people around us, it's massive and it's extremely impactful.
Yeah.
As a teacher, I've been a teacher for over 13 years now, and it's one of those jobs that you're very well underpaid and you almost never get any form of gratitude, because I have one student who constantly, every single day, I hate school. School's the worst. And I've been having that for 13 plus years now. And it's one of those things that you don't really get good positive feedback to give you meaning, to kind of keep you going. It's like, so we have to understand, though, and this is not just for teachers, but this is for anybody in whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's work or our family life or anything, understanding that you are having an impact in a massive way to your close knit group of people. I think there's a memory, I'll finish off with this and I'll pass it to Jeremy. When I was in 6th grade, every week we would listen to a talk from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, from the founding Rebbe of the Chabad Hasidic movement in our modern age. Jeremy and I, we are constantly referencing him because our motto, our mission statement at Jeremy and I is that when two people come together, it should benefit a third, which is also why we like to have our guests, because now it's three people benefiting many people. So that statement came from the Rebbe. And so we would listen to these talks that he would give, and we had everything recorded. And there was a statement that I believe he made, or maybe it's elsewhere in Torah and Judaism, that you save one life and you save the world. And so there was this little thing that played before every video, this little kid's voice saying, "You can change the whole world." And we as sixth graders were immature, and we thought that was the funniest thing. But now, as adults, it's like, well, that's the truth. As you do one thing, and it impacts one person, and you've impacted the generations that will come after that. That was another thing you said that I just wanted to expound on the last thing. Sorry, I know I said two things, but there's one more thing that I picked up. And this is something we referenced in the podcast, was that oftentimes we don't find meaning until later. That we might be going through something and it might be meaningless. Or I think you were talking about, the car and how that brought you meaning, but it was something you only discovered later. So I know that I'm constantly searching and striving for meaning in every single thing. And sometimes it's not there, and sometimes it's not meant to be there, but sometimes it's also going to be something that's going to come later on that we'll realize. So those are just the things I wanted to highlight, pop up, and speak out to. So thank you again for sharing.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, Jeremy, I'm going to...
Actually, I just wanted to tie one quick thing, because I have nothing to add to that. I just don't want to add the one question, because I think you're going this way. This is my gut feeling telling me. But I think that sometimes we are working too hard to find meaning. Try to tie that into that, because this is what I'm sensing.
That I was just going to respond to Baruch about that. That in my overall beliefs and understanding, I don't have to understand why this one particular thing is happening.
Wow.
Right.
That's powerful.
Because overall I understand that there is a flow to life, and there somehow I will find the meaning in it, or I will create the meaning for it. Later on, something will become evident to me why this thing happened that prepared me for this next thing, or maybe caused me to take a left turn instead of a right turn.
Right.
And the left turn was the correct turn, but I didn't know it. And so, that constant, oh my gosh, why am I going through this? What is the meaning in this? What am I? It doesn't have to be held under a microscope. In fact, these kinds of things don't really look good under a microscope. In fact, if you look at just about anything under a really powerful microscope, it doesn't look very good.
Yeah.
I mean, but if you pull away from it, actually, there was a Salvador Dali created painting that was a bunch of little squares that, if you looked up close, you couldn't make any sense of it. But if you pulled away from it, it became a picture of Abraham Lincoln. But you could only see it from a distance.
Wow.
You couldn't see it up close. And we are up close to the things that are happening in our lives. And you can't tell because we don't have perspective. And that's what time and even some emotional distance from the event can bring us. They can bring us perspective. There's a story that I'm going to butcher this, and I thought about it right before I got on air, and I was going to try to look it up, but I didn't even know where to look it up. Where two farmers are talking, and one farmer asks the other, how's your kids? Oh, my son, he fell off and broke his leg. Oh, that's terrible. Well, good, terrible, I don't know. But then they came to conscribe him into the army, and because he had a broken leg, he couldn't go into the army. And the guy said, "Oh, that's wonderful, wonderful, terrible, I don't know." And the story goes on that this one guy's assigning a value judgment to each incident, and the other guy's just kind of, I don't know. let's just see how it plays out, basically.
Right.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. I actually relate to that because there was a video that I keep looking for. When I was a little bit younger, I saw this video and it just had a huge impact on my life. And for the life of me, I cannot find it anymore. But I remember it was this video that was actually pretty viral back in the day. And it starts off with a picture of a toilet. Like that's literally how it starts off. And then it's like, and then you see kind of like in the frame, like the video is taking it through a frame of some sort. So it's zooming backwards. And then there was like something else. And they were pretty quite dramatic items that they were using. And they're just keep on zooming back, zooming back, zooming back, and it's going through frame and frame. And at the end of, I think it's like a 6-7 minute video, it's this beautiful architectural masterpiece, this beautiful picture. And basically the whole anecdote, the artist who designed it, he took these sort of quote unquote negative items in the world or controversial items in the world, and he put them all together to make this beautiful masterpiece. But the only way you were able to see it is the more you moved backwards from it. Brilliant, brilliant video. I wish I could find it again to, just to demonstrate it. But that really had an impact on me in life and saying, right now things are difficult or things are tough. I'll just share a very quick story because it is something I'm sharing right now a lot on social media. Is my story how I came to my impossible dream. There were so many times in my life people were telling me, oh, it's impossible to achieve that. Oh, it's impossible. Yet I've achieved them all. And I'm in the middle of achieving the remainder of them, And to me, the lesson is that here I was, trying to search for, let's say, that ideal wife, that everybody thought was elusive. Therapists and matchmakers and whoever I went to all thought I was crazy. But in the end of the day, thank God, I ended up meeting that person who, under my circumstances, is ideal. And that to me, that lesson right there, the 8 years that it took me to find this, this ideal wife was me trying so hard, finding meaning and purpose in everything. And the lesson I learned out of that whole story was, as long as you have direction and you have a focus, stick to it, despite what other people have to say. But you don't necessarily have to, as you were saying, work so hard in searching for that meaning. You could remove, in my situation, I decided I had to remove the organizational part of the religion that I was part of. It was just this organized religion that it's a stereotype in a sense that they said, oh, this kind of woman would never marry you because of your, religiosity or whatever that case was. And I said, that just simply didn't make sense to me. Listen, if God said so in the Bible and you could prove it to me and you could show it to me, I'm all in. I respect the Bible. And you know what? I respect psychology. If you could even prove it in psychology, I'm all in. But there was no basis in psychology. There was no basis in religion. There was no basis in anything. And this is your limited belief. I don't have to fall under that. I could challenge that status quo. So that's essentially how I got to this impossible dream, is by stop working so hard searching for meaning. Just go with the flow, as you said.
Wow.
Congratulations on finding her. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, like I said, I've been married 4 times. I've only been divorced 3, so that tells you something. But I think so too. And I've had goals. I've set goals every year for the last 40 plus years. But I was also thinking that we had when I got the original conversation you guys had, we were talking about trauma as well. And, trauma is a very big topic these days.
Sure.
And it sounds like all of us, and most people have, and most people who get into addictive disorders have trauma in their life, whether it's what they call the big T traumas or little T traumas. And the difference being, big T traumas are what you're familiar with, rape, witnessing a murder, Katrina, or the, towers in New York coming down, and that shared trauma. But there's also and there's also now some things being talked about of race trauma and even religious trauma. I mean, there's been attacks on religious institutions that just keeps multiplying, and the hatred that's going on in the world is just heartbreaking. But the little t traumas are sometimes not so easy to identify and can be far more debilitating in many cases than the little t trauma, than the big T traumas, because people who have experienced big T trauma, they have something that they can sort of attach their emotional wounds and why they're sort of messed up, and I hate to use that term, but they have something that can explain that. The people with the little t traumas, which are things like, why are you so stupid, or what's wrong with you? And parents are just, I'm a parent and I understand, but somebody being told that they're ugly or that they're stupid or that virtually everything they do is wrong, or they don't get the right balance of congratulations and discipline and things, they leave big scars and big wounds as well.
Right.
Sure. And my work with people, people come in and they talk about feeling broken, and I don't use that term. I use wounded. People are wounded. And the most dangerous animal in the animal kingdom is a wounded animal, because a wounded animal has nothing to lose.
Right.
They will fight with a ferocity that a healthy animal will not.
Yeah.
And so wounded people also fight, and unfortunately they fight themselves more than anybody else, but wounded people do fight other people as well.
Right.
So but I try to work with people on healing their wounds, not repairing their brokenness. And
wow, that's powerful.
Two core beliefs, I believe, and because I work a lot in addiction, I think it goes beyond addiction, but two core beliefs are: there's something intrinsically missing, broken, wrong with me, and as a result of that belief, life will never really work out for me. And so these people, anytime things start to go well, they sabotage it. Things go really poorly, they go get some help to make them better, but they stay within this comfort zone of just so good, not too good,
right,
and just so bad but not too bad,
Right.
and so I work really hard to help people see how they can heal those wounds. And the healing is connection. That's where the healing comes.
Wow.
To become connected with other human beings, with a community, with a belief system of any kind. It doesn't really matter as much what it is, although Satanism doesn't really work that well in that framework. But because I had people ask me about that, and no, I don't think so. But I have Jewish clients, I have Christian clients, I have Muslim clients, I have a Mormon clients, and at the heart of all of those, at the real heart of all of it, is spirituality. At least this is my belief, and spirituality is about connecting both with our own spirits and the spirits of other human beings, and the universal spirit. So I just wanted to throw that out, just to talk, just to bring trauma into the conversation a little bit, but because we're talking about meaning and suffering, and how do we get through adversity, and trauma is one of the big adversities we have to get through.
Right.
I agree. Yeah. So this is just that part of the show where it's winding down. It's pretty much after the 45-minute limit that we usually have. But again, Gary
Prelude.
was just so incredible. We do invite the audience, as usual, to the extended conversation, the third part of the conversation, where, as we believe here, that everybody has a voice and that voice has to be heard. And so we've opened up a clubhouse room just exclusively for that. Tomorrow, it's going to be, as of this recording, or actually when this recording goes live, it's Thursday, February 10th. There's going to be a link to the actual clubhouse. And again, it's a place for you guys to show up and to share your inputs, your thoughts, what you guys have to say. We believe everybody has a mark in the world to leave here in this world. And just to finalize and to end up on I'm just inspired by this conversation, especially from my background in psychology. What I was a little bit disappointed, and I'll be honest, and it might be a little bit controversial. I got into psychology because of Viktor Frankl, and I was surprised that there wasn't so much talk about meaning and purpose, at least in my education and my background. And Gary, you made this so refreshing to hear that you brought this in, and in your work and in your background and how you came to it. If you just want to spend just like a minute or two on how important meaning and purpose is, and what do you have to say about Viktor Frankl into psychology?
I agree that I hadn't heard him talked about much, but I do want to. When I identify myself, I consider myself a cognitive behavioral therapist and a transpersonal therapist. And transpersonal psychology is the psychology of transcending the individual. And there you'll hear more conversations about spiritual issues, about meaning and purpose, and even about Viktor Frankl himself. But I think he was initially considered an existential psychologist or psychiatrist, and existentialism has lost its luster to a lot of people, and I think that's part of why you don't hear that, the name Viktor Frankl, and they don't talk about that. But as I kind of illustrated in this show, and meaning and purpose is really about just about everything, because without it, it's just unbearable. Life is way too painful to go through if you have got no meaning and purpose to why you're going through the pain. And if you have meaning and purpose, and if you have that mission statement or that belief system and that transcendence and that community, you can find meaning and purpose in just about anything. There's a saying that I use a lot: before enlightenment, shovel, stool, in a different word, and carry water. After enlightenment, shovel, stool, and carry water. And the reason for that is because the only difference between the one person and the other person is the other person knows the meaning and the purpose of why they're shoveling stool and carrying water. The other one's just going through the motions. So,
wow.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. So yes, again, we are close to the top of the hour. So here is that email. You could email exceptionallyirresistible@gmail.com. For those who have stayed all the way to the end, there is a freebie, and typically we give out the exercise, the mental real estate, where it's all about, surrounding yourself with people who are just going to really enhance the meaning and purpose in your life. So that's a gift for all those who stayed over time, and we really thank you. Baruch, any last words?
I'm speechless as usual. This was incredibly enlightening. thank God I haven't found any stool before this, and hopefully there's no stool to come afterwards. But this was incredibly enlightening, very impactful. A lot of it really spoke to me as an individual. So I'm going to be going back through that, and I know that there's just so many golden nuggets here. The only thing that I have to say, I came up with another marketing product for us, Jeremy.
Oh, no.
Instead of the in addition to the bobbleheads, we're going to start selling branded ice packs for the back of our necks because there's so much bobbling going on. But again, just, Dr. Gary, Dr. Fisher, Gary, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. This was incredibly impactful.
Very.
And yeah, that's all I can say left.
It was an honor. Thank you guys for asking me.
Thank you so much. And that ends this week's broadcast. We'll see you tomorrow on Clubhouse, and we will see you again next week, same place, same time. Thanks again, everybody, and see you soon.